The first shot of the day echoed across the plains as Abigail Rose stood on the edge of her property, staring out at the empty horizon that seemed to mirror the hollow feeling inside her. Wyoming Territory, 1878, a place where the land was as unforgiving as the news she had received yesterday from the doctor in Cody. "I'm afraid you'll never bear children, Miss Rose," he had said, his voice as dry as the summer wind. Those words had changed everything, shattering dreams she hadn't even realized were so precious until they were deemed impossible. Abigail lowered her rifle, the jackrabbit she'd been aiming for long gone. At 26, she had built a modest life for herself on this homestead outside of Cody, Wyoming, following the death of her parents 3 years prior. She had convinced herself that independence was all she needed. The doctor's proclamation shouldn't matter so much to a woman who had chosen to live alone, running her father's small ranch with just 2 hired hands and her determination. But it did matter. It mattered terribly. She trudged back toward her cabin, the morning sun already beating down on her back. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn, shielding her eyes against the glare. A lone rider approached, his silhouette unmistakable Matthew Nielsen, the neighboring rancher who had arrived in Cody last spring. His cattle operation bordered her property to the west, and their interactions had been limited to polite nods and occasional discussions about water rights and strays. "Morning, Miss Rose," he called, reining his palomino to a stop several feet away. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the dry ground between them. "Thought I heard a shot." Abigail lifted her chin slightly. "Just hunting breakfast, Mr. Nielsen. Wasn't successful." Matthew dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. At 32, his face was tanned and weathered from years under the open sky, but his blue eyes remained clear and direct. "I've got more than enough to share," he offered, gesturing toward a brace of quail tied to his saddle. "Came across them on my way over. Was hoping to talk to you about something if you've got time." Pride urged her to refuse, but practicality won out. "That's generous of you," she said. "I've got coffee on the stove." They walked in silence toward her cabin, a sturdy structure her father had built with his own hands. Matthew led his horse, keeping a respectful distance that somehow irritated her today. Everything irritated her today. In the small kitchen, Abigail busied herself preparing the birds while Matthew spoke about a mountain lion that had been troubling his calves. His deep voice filled the modest room, and she found herself grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. "Anyway," he concluded, "I thought we might coordinate our efforts. No sense in both of us losing stock if we can hunt this cat together." Abigail nodded, focusing on the task at hand. "Makes sense. Jenkins and Tate can help too, they're good trackers." She referred to her hired hands, currently out mending the north fence line. Matthew watched her for a moment too long, and she felt his gaze like a physical touch. "Is everything all right, Miss Rose? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," she replied automatically, then set down her knife with more force than necessary. "No, that's not true. I'm not fine at all." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, surprising her as much as him. Matthew said nothing, just waited. "I went to see Dr. Holloway yesterday," she continued, her voice growing quieter. "He confirmed what I've suspected for some time. I can't have children. Ever." Saying it aloud made it real in a way that even the doctor's solemn pronouncement hadn't. She expected pity, the reason she hadn't planned to tell anyone, but when she finally met his eyes, she saw only a quiet understanding that somehow hurt worse. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "That's a hard thing to hear. A hard thing to hear." Yes, it was that. Abigail turned back to the quail, blinking rapidly. "It shouldn't matter so much. It's not as though I have a husband or—" She stopped herself, embarrassed by her frankness. "But it matters to you," Matthew said. "That's enough reason to grieve it." Something in his words, the permission to feel this loss, nearly undid her composure. She nodded once, sharply, and changed the subject. "How many men can you spare for the mountain lion hunt?" Matthew allowed the shift. "3 good riders. We could start tomorrow at first light." They settled into discussing logistics, and Abigail felt grateful for the return to practical matters. By the time breakfast was ready, she had pushed her sorrow back down to that private place where it could be contained. They ate on her small porch, watching the Wyoming landscape shimmer in the morning heat. It was only after Matthew had mounted his horse to leave that he paused, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Rose, Abigail, I hope you know that a person's worth isn't measured by what their body can or cannot do." Before she could respond, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving her standing in the yard with his words echoing in her mind. The mountain lion hunt proved successful 3 days later, though not without cost. One of Matthew's men took a nasty fall when his horse spooked at the cat's sudden appearance from a rocky outcropping. Abigail was the closest when it happened, and she reacted without thinking, putting herself between the injured man and the snarling predator. Her shot went wide, but it distracted the mountain lion long enough for Matthew to make the kill. The tension of the moment hung in the air as the echo of gunshots faded into the hills. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen," Matthew said as he dismounted beside her, his voice tight with what might have been anger or concern. Abigail lowered her rifle. He was down. "What would you have done?" Matthew's gaze held hers for a long moment before the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Probably something equally foolish." He turned to help his injured ranch hand, leaving Abigail with the unsettling realization that Matthew Nielsen was not the man she had assumed him to be. Over the following weeks, Abigail found herself thinking of Matthew at odd moments when the sun hit the hills just so at dawn, or when she spotted a hawk soaring over his property. Their paths crossed more frequently, sometimes by coincidence and sometimes by what seemed like design on his part. One afternoon in early July, he arrived with a wagon loaded with fence posts. "Thought you might need these," he explained. "Saw your west line was sagging when I rode by yesterday." "You rode by my west fence yesterday?" Abigail asked, one eyebrow raised. The west boundary was a good mile from the main trail. Matthew had the good grace to look slightly abashed. "I was checking on some strays." "Of course," she said, not believing him for a moment. "Well, thank you for the posts. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. I cut too many for my own needs." He hesitated, then added, "Though I wouldn't say no to another one of your apple pies someday." Abigail found herself smiling. "Is that what this is about, Mr. Nielsen? You're trying to bribe me for baked goods. Is it working?" he asked, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "It might be," she admitted. "Come back on Sunday. I'll have pie." The invitation surprised them both, but as Matthew drove away, Abigail realized it had been a long time since she'd had something to look forward to. Sunday arrived with a clarity of sky that seemed to promise good things. Abigail rose early, ignoring the flutter of nerves in her stomach as she prepared for Matthew's visit. It was just pie and coffee with a neighbor, she told herself. Nothing more. But when he appeared at her door in a clean shirt with his hair still damp from washing, something shifted in her understanding of what was happening between them. This was not just neighborly kindness. They sat on her porch after eating, watching the distant mountains turn gold in the afternoon light. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on their pasts, his family in Missouri, her childhood in Pennsylvania before her parents had moved west seeking a better life. "Do you ever regret coming here?" Matthew asked, his voice thoughtful. Abigail considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When winter sets in and the wind howls for days on end, or when the crops fail because of drought." She paused, looking out at the land she had come to love despite its harshness. "But then spring comes, and I see the first wildflowers pushing through the snow, and I can't imagine being anywhere else." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's how I felt when I first saw Wyoming. Like I'd finally found the place I was meant to be." "And have you?" she asked. "Found where you're meant to be?" His gaze met hers, steady and warm. "I'm getting closer every day." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Abigail looked away first, her cheeks warm. "Tell me about your ranch in Missouri," she said, deliberately changing the subject. Matthew allowed it, describing his family's farm and his decision to venture west after his father's death. "My brothers were content to stay, but I wanted something that was mine alone. Something I built from the ground up." "I understand that," Abigail said. "After my parents died, everyone expected me to sell this place and move into town, maybe marry the first willing man." She shook her head. "But this land is part of me now. I couldn't give it up." "I'm glad you didn't," Matthew said quietly. As the sun began to set, he reluctantly took his leave. Standing in her doorway, Abigail watched him go, a strange mixture of contentment and longing settling in her chest. The summer unfolded in a pattern of work and increasingly frequent visits. Matthew found reasons to stop by a book he thought she might enjoy, news of a traveling medicine show coming to Cody, an offer to help when one of her horses went lame. Abigail began to look forward to seeing his tall figure on the horizon, anticipation warming her in ways she hadn't expected. In early August, the town of Cody held its annual summer social, an event Abigail usually avoided. This year, however, she found herself carefully pressing her best dress and pinning her hair in a style she hadn't worn since before her parents' passing. The gathering was held in the town square, with tables of food set up under canvas awnings and lanterns strung between trees. It seemed the entire county had turned out, drawn by the promise of music, dancing, and respite from daily labor. Abigail arrived alone, immediately self-conscious among the families and couples. She had just decided this had been a mistake when Matthew appeared beside her, handsome in a dark coat and clean shirt. "I was hoping you'd come," he said, his smile reaching his eyes. "You look beautiful, Abigail." The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of how long it had been since anyone had looked at her as Matthew was looking at her now. He offered his arm. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" They moved onto the makeshift dance floor as the fiddler began a waltz. Matthew's hand was warm against her back, his steps sure as he guided her through the turn. Abigail couldn't remember the last time she had danced, certainly not since coming to Wyoming. "I'm out of practice," she admitted as she narrowly avoided stepping on his foot. "You're doing fine," he assured her. "Just follow my lead." She did, gradually relaxing into the rhythm. Around them, other couples swirled and smiled, the evening taking on a dreamlike quality in the glow of the lanterns. "People are watching us," Abigail murmured, noticing the curious glances from townsfolk. "Let them watch," Matthew said. "I'm dancing with the most captivating woman here." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You've certainly developed a silver tongue, Mr. Nielsen." "Only speaking the truth, Miss Rose." As the dance ended, Matthew kept hold of her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Would you walk with me? It's a bit crowded here." They strolled to the edge of the square, where the noise of the gathering faded slightly. The August night was warm, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. "I have a confession to make," Matthew said suddenly. Abigail turned to him, curious. "That sounds serious." It is, in a way. He looked uncharacteristically nervous. I didn't come to Wyoming just looking for ranch land. Oh, I came because I was running from something or someone, I should say. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. There was a woman in Missouri. We were to be married. Abigail felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. I see. No, you don't, Matthew said quickly. She broke the engagement when she found someone with more money, more prospects. I was devastated, thought I'd never trust another woman with my heart. He looked at her directly. Until I met you. The weight lifted, replaced by a flutter of something Abigail wasn't ready to name. Matthew, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted gently. I just wanted you to know that. Whatever happens between us, it won't be shadowed by my past. Abigail was silent for a moment, processing his words. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. And I'm sorry for what happened to you. Don't be. If things had gone differently in Missouri, I wouldn't be here now, with you. The moment hung between them, full of potential. Abigail took a breath, gathering her courage. I should tell you something, too, about what the doctor said. Matthew nodded, waiting. He told me that I have a condition, something with my womb that makes it impossible to carry a child. He was very clear that I should. That any man who courted me should know that I can never give him a family. The words were difficult to say, each one like a stone she had to push out. Matthew's expression didn't change. Is that what you've been worried about? That I would care about such a thing, wouldn't you? Abigail challenged, her voice low but intense. Most men want sons to carry on their name, to inherit what they build. I can never provide that. Abigail, Matthew said, taking her hands in his, when I look at you, I don't see a vessel for children. I see a woman of extraordinary courage and grace. A woman I've grown to admire more each day. His grip tightened slightly. If you never want to discuss this again, we won't. If you want to talk about it every day, we can. But please know that it changes nothing about how I feel. Tears threatened at the edges of Abigail's vision. And how do you feel? She whispered. In answer, Matthew leaned down and kissed her, a gentle touch that nonetheless seemed to stop time around them. When he pulled away, his eyes were as bright as the stars overhead. Does that answer your question? He asked. Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. In that moment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps the future held more possibility than she had dared to hope. As summer gave way to autumn, Abigail and Matthew's relationship deepened. They spent every Sunday together, alternating between their properties. He taught her to fish in the creek that ran through his land. She showed him how to make her mother's famous apple butter. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch or by his fireplace, talking of everything and nothing, comfortable in the growing bond between them. But beneath their growing happiness, Abigail still carried the weight of her condition. Some nights, she would wake in the darkness, the echo of the doctor's words in her ears. On those nights, she would walk outside and look up at the stars, wondering if she was being selfish in allowing Matthew to care for her. One such night in late October, as the first frost silvered the grass around her cabin, Matthew arrived unexpectedly. He had been in town for supplies and had seen the light in her window on his way home. Couldn't sleep? He asked, finding her wrapped in a blanket on the porch. Abigail shook her head, just thinking. Matthew sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. About what? She hesitated, then decided on honesty. About us, about whether I'm being fair to you. He was silent for a moment, because of what the doctor said. Yes. She turned to look at him, her face pale in the moonlight. Matthew, I care for you deeply, more than I ever thought possible, but I need to know that you've truly considered what a future with me would mean. I have, he said simply. No children, she pressed. Ever. Are you prepared for that? Matthew took her hand, his palm rough against her skin. Abigail, I've known men who had a dozen children and no love in their homes. I've seen families torn apart by greed and bitterness. What I want is a partnership with someone I respect and cherish." He paused, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. "Someone I love," the word hung in the night air between them. Love, such a simple word for such a complex feeling. "I love you," he continued, his voice steady. "I love your strength and your stubbornness. I love how you can outshoot most men in the county and still make the lightest biscuits I've ever tasted. I love the way you look at the land, like it's something precious to be cared for, not just used." Tears slipped down Abigail's cheeks, silent tracks in the moonlight. "And if you'll have me," Matthew said, "I'd like to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like." Abigail took a shaking breath. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for some time now." Matthew's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He leaned forward, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future embraced. They were married on the first day of December, a clear, cold Saturday when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. The ceremony took place in the small church in Cody, with nearly the whole town in attendance. Abigail wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her taller frame, and carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried wildflowers from the summer. As they spoke their vows, Abigail felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as though all the disparate pieces of her life were finally coming together in a pattern she hadn't been able to see before. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes and a small band playing lively tunes. Matthew barely left Abigail's side, his joy evident in every glance and touch. Dr. Holloway approached them during the festivities, offering congratulations with a slightly awkward formality. "Miss Rose, Mrs. Nielsen now. I should say I trust you shared the information we discussed with your husband." Abigail stiffened slightly. "Yes, Dr. Matthew is fully aware of my condition." The doctor nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I wish you both happiness, and if you ever need medical attention, please don't hesitate to call on me." As he moved away, Matthew squeezed Abigail's hand. "Are you all right?" she nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, it's just a reminder, I suppose." Matthew bent to whisper in her ear. "The only thing I need to be reminded of today is that you are my wife, and I am the luckiest man in Wyoming Territory." His words warmed her, and she let the momentary shadow pass. This was their day, and she wouldn't allow anything to dim its light. They began their married life on Matthew's ranch, which was larger and better established than Abigail's homestead. After much discussion, they decided to maintain both properties, using hers primarily for crops while focusing on cattle at his. It was a practical arrangement that allowed them to expand their operation while honoring the legacy of Abigail's parents. The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Abigail discovered the joy of partnership, of having someone to share both burdens and pleasures. Matthew proved to be a considerate husband, never taking her for granted, and always seeking her opinion on matters that affected them both. They developed rituals that bound their days together. Coffee shared in pre-dawn darkness, evening walks along the creek when weather permitted, reading aloud to each other by lamplight when snow kept them indoors. Their physical relationship blossomed as well, each learning the other's desires with a tenderness that deepened their connection. By February, they had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, which was why Abigail was so disturbed when she began to feel unwell. It started with simple fatigue, a heaviness in her limbs that made even routine tasks exhausting. Then came the nausea, striking without warning and leaving her pale and shaking. Matthew noticed immediately, concern darkening his eyes. "You need to see the doctor," he insisted after finding her retching behind the barn one morning. Abigail wiped her mouth, embarrassed and frustrated. "It's just a stomach upset. It will pass." But it didn't pass. If anything, her symptoms worsened. After a week of watching her struggle, Matthew took matters into his own hands, riding into town to fetch Dr. Holloway himself. The doctor arrived that afternoon, his leather bag in hand and a look of professional detachment on his face. "Mrs. Nielsen," he greeted her. "Your husband tells me you've been unwell." Abigail, sitting weakly by the fire, nodded. "Nothing serious, I'm sure." Dr. Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Let me be the judge of that. Now tell me your symptoms." She described the fatigue and nausea, the occasional dizziness, the strange aversions to foods she normally enjoyed. As she spoke, something shifted in the doctor's expression, a look of growing surprise. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "About 2 weeks," Abigail answered. "Though the nausea has gotten worse in the last few days." Dr. Holloway nodded slowly. "And when was your last monthly cycle?" The question caught Abigail off guard. I'm not sure. December, I think." With a start, she realized it had been nearly 2 months. Her cycles had always been irregular, so she hadn't thought much of it. "I see," the doctor said. "Mrs. Nielsen, I need to examine you more thoroughly. Perhaps your husband could wait outside." Matthew squeezed her hand before leaving the room. Abigail submitted to the examination with growing anxiety, the doctor's silence unnerving as he pressed on her abdomen and listened to her chest. Finally, he sat back, an expression of disbelief on his face. "Mrs. Nielsen, I hardly know what to say. Based on my examination, I believe you are with child." Abigail stared at him. "That's not possible," she said flatly. "You told me yourself." "I told you what medical science led me to believe," Dr. Holloway interrupted, "that your condition made conception highly unlikely, if not impossible. And I stand by that assessment." He shook his head in wonder. "But it appears that in your case, the impossible has happened." The room seemed to spin around Abigail. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without waiting for more obvious signs." "The tenderness in your breasts, the slight swelling of your abdomen combined with your other symptoms, yes, I'm reasonably confident." "But how?" Abigail whispered. Dr. Holloway closed his bag with a click. "Medicine is not an exact science, Mrs. Nielsen. The human body sometimes defies our understanding." He paused. "I must caution you, however. Given your condition, this pregnancy carries significant risks. There is a very real possibility of miscarriage or other complications." Abigail barely heard him, her mind still struggling with the impossible news. "Shall I call your husband in?" the doctor asked gently. She nodded, unable to form words. When Matthew entered, his face was tight with worry. "Doctor." Holloway gestured him to sit beside Abigail, then delivered the news with clinical precision. Matthew's expression transformed from concern to shock to wonder in the span of seconds. "A baby," he whispered, looking at Abigail as though seeing her for the first time. "Our baby, doctor." Holloway cleared his throat. "As I was explaining to your wife, Mr. Nielsen, this is an unusual situation. The pregnancy will be high risk and you should both prepare yourselves for difficulties." But Matthew wasn't listening. He had taken Abigail's hands in his eyes shining with emotion. "A miracle," he said simply. "Our miracle." After the doctor left, extracting promises of regular check-ups and extreme caution, Abigail and Matthew sat together in stunned silence, the news still washing over them in waves. "I'm afraid," Abigail finally admitted, her voice small. Matthew pulled her close, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "I know, I am too." He stroked her hair gently. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." "What if I lose the baby?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we'll grieve together," he answered honestly. "And we'll continue our life, loving each other just as we do now." His steady acceptance calmed something in Abigail. This was uncharted territory for both of them, but they would navigate it as they had everything else side by side. The following weeks were a delicate balance of hope and caution. Matthew insisted that Abigail rest more, taking on extra work himself and hiring another hand to help with her duties. She chafed at the restrictions at first, unused to idleness, but gradually accepted that this was a time for prudence. Dr. Holloway visited weekly, each time seeming more amazed that the pregnancy continued. "You're defying all medical expectations, Mrs. Nielsen," he told her during one examination. "Your body appears to be adapting remarkably well." As winter gave way to spring, Abigail's body changed with the season. Her belly swelled, a visible reminder of the life growing within her. The nausea eased, replaced by a ravenous appetite and a strange restlessness. Matthew watched these changes with a mixture of awe and anxiety. At night, he would place his hand on her growing abdomen, his touch reverent. "I can hardly believe this is real," he confessed one evening. "After everything the doctor said, after accepting that we would never have this." Abigail covered his hand with hers. "I know. Sometimes I'm afraid to believe it myself." Their fears were justified in late April when Abigail woke in the night with sharp pains low in her belly. Panic seized her as she felt wetness between her thighs, certain that it was blood, that their miracle was ending. "Matthew," she gasped, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong." He was instantly alert, lighting the lamp beside their bed. The flame illuminated her terrified face, then the sheets beneath her. The wetness wasn't blood, but clear fluid. "I'll get the doctor," Matthew said, already pulling on his clothes. "Just hold on, Abigail. Everything will be all right." She nodded, trying to believe him even as another pain gripped her. The ride to town and back was the longest of Matthew's life. By the time he returned with Dr. Holloway, Abigail's pains were coming regularly, her face pale with strain. "This is premature labor," the doctor announced after examining her. "The baby is coming, whether we're ready or not." The next hours were a blur of pain and fear for Abigail. She clutched Matthew's hand through each contraction, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Doctor." Holloway moved efficiently around them, his initial pessimism giving way to determined focus. "The baby is small but in the correct position," he informed them as dawn began to lighten the sky outside. "Mrs. Nielsen, when the next pain comes, I need you to push with all your might." Abigail did as instructed, a primal groan escaping her as she bore down. Again and again she pushed, exhaustion making her limbs tremble, but she refused to give up. "One more," the doctor urged. "I can see the head." Matthew supported her shoulders as she gathered her remaining strength for a final effort. With a cry that seemed to come from her very soul, Abigail pushed and felt the incredible sensation of the baby slipping from her body. For one terrible moment, there was silence. Then a thin, indignant wail filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Holloway announced, his voice betraying his own amazement. "Small but appears healthy." He placed the tiny, squirming infant on Abigail's chest. She stared down at her son in wonder, this impossible child with a shock of dark hair and a determined cry. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she touched his perfect miniature fingers. "Hello, James," she whispered, using the name they had chosen for a boy after Matthew's father. "We've been waiting for you." Matthew leaned down to embrace them both, his own tears dampening Abigail's hair. "Our miracle," he murmured, "our perfect miracle." Dr. Holloway cleared his throat, clearly moved despite his professional demeanor. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong," he admitted, but both mother and child will need careful monitoring. The baby is early and small. There could still be complications. Matthew nodded solemnly. We understand, Doctor, and we're grateful for your help. After the doctor left, Abigail and Matthew lay together on their bed, the tiny form of their son sleeping between them. Outside, the spring sun rose over the Wyoming plains, bathing their home in golden light. I never thought I would have this, Abigail said softly, watching James's small chest rise and fall. Matthew kissed her forehead tenderly. You deserve every happiness, Abigail. I'm just grateful I get to share it with you. They drifted to sleep together, a family formed against all odds, with no knowledge of the challenges and joys that still awaited them. The first months of James's life were both precious and precarious. His early arrival had left him vulnerable, his tiny body working hard to thrive in the world. Abigail barely slept, constantly checking that he was breathing, marveling at each ounce he gained. Matthew arranged for the wife of one of their ranch hands, a woman who had raised 6 children of her own, to come daily to help Abigail. Mrs. Tompkins was a sturdy, practical woman whose matter-of-fact approach to baby care provided a steadying influence. He's a fighter, this little one, she assured Abigail when James struggled to nurse. Got his mama's spirit, I can tell. By midsummer, James had begun to fill out, his initial fragility giving way to a robust energy that delighted his parents. He had Matthew's blue eyes and Abigail's dimpled smile, a perfect blending of them both. Dr. Holloway continued his visits, each time shaking his head in amazement at James's progress. Medical miracles do happen, he conceded, watching the baby grasp his finger with surprising strength, though I've rarely witnessed one so complete. As autumn approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of their marriage, Abigail and Matthew settled into a new pattern of life, one centered around their unexpected son, but still grounded in their love for each other and the land they tended together. They celebrated James's 6-month birthday with a small gathering at their ranch. The Hands and their families came, along with neighbors who had supported them through the difficult pregnancy and birth. Even Dr. Holloway made an appearance, bringing a handcrafted wooden rattle that his own father had made. To our miracle, Matthew toasted, raising a glass as Abigail held James on her hip. And to my extraordinary wife, who never ceases to amaze me. The guests echoed the toast, glasses raised to the family that defied explanation. That night, after the celebration had ended and James slept soundly in his cradle, Matthew and Abigail sat on their porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. You ever think about having another? Matthew asked quietly. Abigail turned to him in surprise. Another baby, after everything the doctor said, after how difficult the pregnancy was. Matthew took her hand. I'm not saying we should try, I just wondered if you ever think about it. She was silent for a long moment. Sometimes, she finally admitted. When James does something new and wonderful, I catch myself imagining another child beside him, a brother or sister to share his adventures. She sighed. But I know how fortunate we are to have him. It seems greedy to hope for more. It's not greedy to hope, Matthew said. It's human. Abigail leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Whatever happens, whatever our family looks like in the years to come, I'm grateful for what we have now. Matthew kissed the top of her head. As am I, my love, as am I. Life continued its steady rhythm through the changing seasons. James grew into a toddler, his steps first uncertain, then increasingly bold as he explored the world around him. He showed an early affinity for animals, fearlessly approaching the gentler horses and delighting in collecting eggs from the henhouse with Abigail. Matthew expanded their cattle operation, his careful management bringing prosperity that allowed them to hire more hands and improve both properties. Abigail's homestead became a productive farm, its crops supplementing the beef that was their main source of income. The town of Cody grew as well, the railroad's arrival bringing new settlers and opportunities. Abigail occasionally took James to visit, enjoying the growing community while still preferring the peace of their ranch. It was during one such visit, when James was nearly 2, that Abigail first felt the familiar dizziness and nausea she had experienced during her pregnancy. She dismissed it as a passing illness, perhaps something she had eaten. But when the symptoms persisted for over a week, a wild hope began to form in her mind. She said nothing to Matthew, unwilling to raise expectations that would likely end in disappointment. Instead, she waited until her next visit to town coincided with Dr. Holloway's office hours. The doctor's eyes widened when she described her symptoms. "Mrs. Nielsen, given your history, I hesitate to speculate, but I think I might be with child again," Abigail finished for him. "Is it possible, doctor?" He gestured for her to lie on the examining table. "Let me examine you before we jump to conclusions." "The examination was thorough, doctor." Holloway's expression growing increasingly perplexed as he felt her abdomen and asked questions about her monthly cycles, which had once again ceased. "Well," he said finally, helping her to sit up, "it appears that lightning has indeed struck twice. You are pregnant, Mrs. Nielsen." Despite having suspected it, Abigail felt the room spin around her. "Are you certain?" "As certain as medical science allows," he replied. "Though I must emphasize that your condition still makes this a high-risk pregnancy. The success of your first doesn't guarantee the same outcome this time." Abigail nodded, one hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "I understand, doctor, but James was our miracle. Perhaps this child will be another." Dr. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "I hope you're right, Mrs. Nielsen. In the meantime, I suggest the same precautions we took during your first pregnancy." Abigail left the doctor's office in a daze, young James's hand clutched in hers as they walked to their wagon. How would she tell Matthew? Should she wait, given the risks, or share this incredible news immediately? The decision was made for her that evening when Matthew found her being ill behind the barn, just as he had during her first pregnancy. "Abigail," he asked, his voice tight with concern, "are you sick?" She straightened, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. In the golden light of sunset, Matthew's worried face was so dear, so beloved that she couldn't bear to keep the truth from him, whatever might come. "Not sick," she said softly. "Matthew, I went to see Dr. Holloway today while I was in town." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're pregnant," she nodded, tears suddenly filling her eyes. "He confirmed it. We're going to have another baby." Matthew crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Another miracle," he whispered against her hair. "Oh, Abigail." They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon, both aware of the difficult road ahead, but united in their cautious joy. The second pregnancy proved even more challenging than the first. Abigail's morning sickness was more severe, lasting well into her 4th month. Fatigue left her barely able to care for James, let alone help with the running of the ranch. Matthew shouldered the additional burdens without complaint, hiring a young woman from town to help with household tasks, and James's care when Abigail was confined to bed. He spent every free moment by her side, reading to her, making sure she ate, simply holding her hand when that was all she needed. By the time winter settled over the Wyoming plains, Abigail's pregnancy had progressed to the point where her belly was visibly swollen beneath her dresses. James, now an inquisitive toddler, would pat her stomach curiously. His baby talk including something that sounded remarkably like baby. "You're going to be a big brother," Abigail would tell him, though she wasn't sure how much he understood. "You'll have to help Mama and Papa take care of the new baby." Dr. Holloway visited weekly, his concern evident as he tracked the pregnancy's progress. "The baby appears to be developing normally," he reported after one examination. "But you're showing signs of strain, Mrs. Nielsen. I must insist on complete bed rest for the remainder of your term." Abigail protested, but Matthew backed the doctor firmly. "Whatever keeps you both safe," he said, his voice allowing no argument. Confined to bed through the long winter days, Abigail found time weighing heavily. She read every book they owned, sewed tiny garments for the coming baby, and wrote long letters to her few relatives back east. Matthew brought her daily reports of ranch activities and town news, ensuring she didn't feel entirely cut off from the world. James became her constant companion, playing beside her bed or napping curled against her side. Abigail treasured these quiet moments with her son, aware that soon their family dynamic would shift to accommodate a new member. As February turned to March, with spring still a distant promise in the frozen landscape, Abigail began to experience uncomfortable contractions. Dr. Holloway warned that premature labor was a serious risk and prescribed herbal preparations meant to calm her womb. "We need to keep this baby inside at least another month," he told them gravely. "A birth now would be extremely dangerous for both mother and child." For 2 agonizing weeks, Abigail fought against her body's attempts to deliver the baby too soon. Matthew rarely left her side, sleeping in a chair beside their bed, ready to ride for the doctor at the first sign of trouble. It was during a late-night vigil, with snow falling silently outside their window, that Abigail reached for Matthew's hand. "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice small in the darkness. He gripped her fingers tightly. "I know, so am I. If something happens," she began, but he cut her off. "Nothing will happen. You and the baby will be fine." Abigail shook her head. "We need to be prepared, Matthew." "If a choice must be made, don't," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "Please don't ask me to consider that." "The baby," she insisted softly. "If it comes to it, promise me you'll tell Dr. Holloway to save the baby." Matthew pressed his forehead to their joined hands, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. "I promise," he finally whispered. "But it won't come to that. It can't." Their fears proved unnecessary when, against all medical expectations, Abigail's contractions gradually subsided. The baby remained safely within her for another precious month of development. When labor finally began in earnest on an April morning much like the one that had brought James into the world, Dr. Holloway was cautiously optimistic. "You've carried this child almost to term, which is remarkable given your condition. Now we just need a smooth delivery." The labor was long but less traumatic than her first. Abigail drew on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, Matthew's steady support giving her courage through each contraction. As dawn broke over the plains, their second miracle entered the world with a lusty cry that made Dr. Holloway laugh out loud. "A girl," he announced, placing the red-faced infant on Abigail's chest. "And she appears to have a formidable set of lungs." Exhausted but radiant, Abigail cradled her daughter against her heart. "Margaret," she said, looking up at Matthew. They had chosen the name months ago, after Abigail's mother. Matthew sat beside them on the bed, one arm supporting Abigail while his other hand gently touched his daughter's downy head. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Just like her mother, Doctor." Holloway finished his work efficiently, then stood back, watching the new family with undisguised wonder. "Mrs. Nielsen, You have thoroughly shattered everything I thought I knew about your condition. 2 healthy children against all medical probability." He shook his head. "It's remarkable." "Miracles," Matthew said simply, not taking his eyes off his wife and newborn daughter. The doctor nodded, gathering his supplies. "Indeed, genuine miracles." With Margaret's arrival, their family felt complete in a way Abigail had never dared to imagine during those dark days after her diagnosis. James took to his role as big brother with enthusiasm, bringing his favorite toys to show the baby and insisting on helping with her care in his toddler fashion. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary challenges and joys of family life: first steps and first words, childhood illnesses overcome, seasons of planting and harvest, the gradual expansion of their ranch. Through it all, Matthew and Abigail's partnership deepened, their love weathering each storm and celebrating each triumph. When James was 6 and Margaret 4, Dr. Halloway retired, passing his practice to a younger physician from Denver. He visited the Nielsen ranch one last time before moving east to live with his daughter. "I wanted to see my medical miracles once more," he told Abigail as they sat on the porch, watching Matthew teaching James to throw a lasso while Margaret picked wildflowers nearby. "They're thriving just as I knew they would." Abigail smiled, her heart full. "We're grateful for everything you did for us, Doctor. Without your care, no," he interrupted gently. "I did very little. What happened here was beyond medical explanation." He paused, his gaze resting on the children. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen anything like it. 2 healthy children born to a woman whose condition should have made motherhood impossible." He shook his head in wonder. "It changed how I view medicine, Mrs. Nielsen. Reminded me that there are still mysteries beyond our understanding." After he left, Abigail found Matthew by the corral, watching as their children played with a new litter of kittens discovered in the barn that morning. "What did the old doctor have to say?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Abigail leaned into his embrace. "That our children are miracles beyond medical explanation." Matthew smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I could have told him that years ago." They stood together, watching James and Margaret's delighted faces as the kittens climbed over their laps. In that moment, Abigail felt a sense of completion that went beyond words: a life built on love and perseverance, blessed with miracles that defied explanation. "Remember when you first told me what the doctor said?" Matthew asked quietly. "That day you were hunting and missed that rabbit." Abigail nodded, the memory still vivid after all these years. "I was so certain my life would be defined by what I couldn't have. And now—" She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had come to know better than her own. Lines had formed at the corners of his eyes. A touch of gray highlighted his temples, but to her, he was more handsome than the day they met. "Now I know better," she said simply. "My life is defined by love, yours, our children's, this land." She gestured to the ranch around them, prosperous and beautiful in the summer light. "By all the possibilities I never dared to dream." Matthew's arms tightened around her. "I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were extraordinary. I just didn't know how extraordinary." They shared a kiss, tender with years of shared history, then turned back to watch their children, the miracles who had defied all odds to bring immeasurable joy to their lives. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and pink, Abigail sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the gathering twilight. For the man beside her, who had held her hand through every trial and triumph. For the children who had made the impossible real. For the life they had built together, one day at a time, with courage and faith and unwavering love. It was, she thought, watching Matthew swing Margaret up onto his shoulders while James raced ahead to open the gate. Everything she had never known she wanted, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon with leaves turning gold across the foothills, Abigail stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching a wagon approach along the long drive. Now 37, she wore her experiences in the subtle lines around her eyes and the confident set of her shoulders, a woman who had faced life's challenges and emerged stronger. Matthew rode out to meet the wagon, now driven by their son James, who at 11 had become a skilled horseman and his father's right hand. Beside James sat Margaret, her dark braids flying in the wind as she waved excitedly to her mother. But it was the third child in the wagon that made Abigail's heart swell with familiar wonder. 5-year-old Thomas, their third miracle, born when they had thought their family complete. His arrival had been the easiest of all, as though Abigail's body had finally accepted its ability to nurture life. The wagon pulled up to the house, and the children tumbled out, eager to share news from their trip to town. Matthew followed more sedately, a package tucked under his arm and a smile that still made Abigail's heart skip a beat. "Mama," Thomas called, running to her with arms outstretched. "We saw the train come in." Abigail swept him up, marveling as always at his sturdy weight, so different from the fragile infants his siblings had been. "Was it exciting?" "It was loud," he reported seriously. "But Papa says someday we might ride on it all the way to Denver, did he now?" She looked over Thomas's head to Matthew, who shrugged innocently. "Just possibilities, my love," he said, climbing the steps to join them. "Always good to consider possibilities." The phrase had become something of a family motto over the years, a reminder of the unexpected blessings that had shaped their lives. As the children scattered to their various activities, James to check on a new calf, Margaret to practice her reading, Thomas to the wooden blocks Matthew had carved for him, Abigail and her husband stood together on the porch, surveying the life they had built. "Dr. Bennett stopped me in town," Matthew said, referring to the physician who had taken over Dr. Holloway's practice. "Asked how you were doing." Abigail smiled. "I'm sure he's still baffled by our family. He mentioned that a medical journal back east published Dr. Holloway's account of your case. Apparently it's causing quite a stir in medical circles." "Imagine that," Abigail said softly. "Our lives as a medical curiosity." Matthew took her hand, his touch familiar and comforting. "More than that, I think. Dr. Holloway wrote about hope in the face of medical certainty. About miracles that can't be explained by science." He squeezed her fingers gently. "He told Dr. Bennett that meeting you changed how he practiced medicine, made him more willing to acknowledge the limits of medical knowledge." Abigail leaned against Matthew's shoulder, watching as Thomas carefully balanced one block atop another in the yard. "I never imagined our story might help others." "That's the thing about miracles," Matthew said thoughtfully. "They tend to ripple outward, touching lives beyond our knowing." From inside the house came the sound of Margaret playing the piano they had purchased last Christmas, a simple melody that filled the air with sweet notes. James appeared from the direction of the barn, a book tucked under his arm, always the scholar, despite his love for ranch work. Abigail took in the scene with a heart so full it seemed impossible it wouldn't overflow. 3 children she was never meant to have. A husband whose love had sustained her through doubt and fear. A life rich with purpose and meaning. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what might have happened if you hadn't stopped by that morning, when I was hunting and missed that rabbit?" Matthew considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know that somehow we would have found our way to each other." He turned to face her, his blue eyes as clear and direct as they had been that first day. "Some things are simply meant to be, Abigail." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the familiar line of his jaw. Like us, he agreed, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that held all their shared years. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they loved, Abigail silently acknowledged the truth that had revealed itself over the course of their life together. That the greatest miracle wasn't found in defying medical odds or in the children born against all expectations, but in the everyday courage to believe in possibility, and in the enduring power of love to transform what seems impossible into reality. And in the gathering twilight of that autumn day in Cody, Wyoming, surrounded by the family she had never thought to have, Abigail Nielsen knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges or joys the future might hold, she would face them all with Matthew by her side, just as they had faced everything else together, hand in hand, one miracle at a time.